Tanny Aspen grew up alongside gorillas, forming an unbreakable bond with one in particular, Jalta. But when he was released into the wild, she feared he would forget her. Years later, despite warnings not to approach, she embarked on a journey to see if their connection remained. Tanny and her father, Damien, traveled by boat, searching the dense greenery for familiar faces. When they finally spotted the gorillas, her heart pounded. The guides insisted these animals were wild now, unpredictable and possibly dangerous, but Tanny couldn't believe Jalta would ever harm her. Then she saw him. The once tiny baby she had cradled in her arms now towered over her. Ignoring the calls of caution, she stepped closer. The gorilla moved swiftly toward her, eyes locked on hers. The world seemed to pause as he grabbed her arm. Her father froze. Any sudden movement could turn the moment disastrous. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Jalta gently pressed his forehead against hers, just as he had done when they last parted. A flood of memories rushed through her. Tears filled her eyes as she ran her fingers over his fur. It was as if time had never passed. Their story began years earlier at the Howletts Zoo in Canterbury, where her father's foundation rescued and rehabilitated gorillas. Bims, the first gorilla she met, arrived after poachers killed his family. He became her childhood playmate, but everything changed when Jalta arrived as an orphaned infant. Tanny was old enough to help raise him, feeding and comforting him. Their bond was instant. But gorillas grow fast, and soon Jalta had to move into an enclosure. Bims became his companion, and the two formed their own brotherhood. Tanny was allowed to visit them, but not everyone saw their interactions as safe. When a photography team documented her bond with the gorillas, public outrage erupted. Authorities threatened to shut down the zoo unless safety barriers were enforced. From then on, Tanny could only see Jalta and Bims through glass. The separation was heartbreaking. Every day, she sat by the enclosure, placing her hand on the glass as Jalta mirrored the gesture. He moaned softly, longing to touch her. As difficult as it was, the separation was necessary. The Foundation's goal was always to return the gorillas to the wild. When the time came, they were prepared for life in Gabon, a sanctuary where they could roam free. Their departure was bittersweet. Tanny hugged them tightly, knowing she might never see them again. Years passed. Damien visited the sanctuary once, reporting that Jalta and Bims had integrated into a wild family. It reassured Tanny, but she never stopped thinking about them. Nearly 2 decades later, when Damien fell ill, he resolved to visit Africa one last time. Tanny insisted on going with him, despite warnings that the gorillas had long since forgotten their human past. The journey was arduous: flights, off-road travel, and finally, a boat ride deep into the jungle. The guides warned them to remain cautious. These gorillas were no longer tame. But as they approached, heads peeked through the foliage. The gorillas were watching. Tanny gasped. Jalta and Bims stood among them. Their bodies were larger, their expressions unreadable. But then, Jalta stepped forward. She held her breath. Would he recognize her? Then, just as before, he pressed his forehead against hers. The connection was still there. Bims soon followed, touching her face gently. They had not forgotten. Damien stepped forward, and the gorillas responded playfully, rolling onto him like old times. Even the guides were in shock. Never had they seen wild gorillas react this way to humans. But for Tanny, this was proof of a love that transcended time and distance. When it was time to leave, the gorillas moaned softly, not wanting to let go. Bims held on to her, his grip gentle but firm. Tanny whispered her love, kissed Jalta's forehead one last time and stepped onto the boat. As they drifted away, she knew this was likely their final goodbye. Yet, she left with peace in her heart. Their bond had endured, unbroken despite years of separation. And now, Jalta and Bims were where they truly belonged, wild and free. Thank you everyone for listening to the story. If you subscribe to the channel, you will make me very happy. See you in the next video.